Welcome, everyone, to the 24th Annual Rapoport Family Memorial Passover Lecture here at Drisha. Just to give you a little sense of the Seder within the Passover Seder, I'm going to give my quick little introductory spiel, just little technical details. Then I'm going to hand it over to our founder and dean, Rabbi David Silber, for a few quick words, and he will then pass it along to Dr. Sam Rapoport, and then we will hear from Rabbi Nathan Laufer. So those joining on Zoom, if you receive an invitation to become a panelist, you're welcome. It will not obligate you to do anything. It will merely allow you to share your camera with us so you can be in the room, so to speak. I will send them once I'm done speaking, and then after Rabbi Laufer is done speaking, in case you changed your mind and you decided you do want to be in the room to ask a question and participate in discussion. But we do ask that you please stay muted when you're not speaking. Otherwise, things can get a little noisy and weird. You're welcome to put questions, comments, thoughts in the chat here on Zoom, or if you're joining on Facebook Live, you can put your questions and comments in the comment section directly below the video. So turn it over to you, Rabbi Silber, please.
Welcome, everyone, to the 24th Annual Rapoport Memorial Lecture. It's a wonderful way for us to prepare for Pesach. The themes typically revolve around the Seder. This year, we are very excited to hear from Rabbi Nathan Laufer. I will say that Rabbi Laufer ran the Wexner Foundation for many years, and I worked there, and it was great working with him. It was terrific. I really appreciate his work for the foundation and his help to me as well, personally. I will turn it over to Dr. Rapoport to say a few words, introduce Rabbi Laufer, and looking forward to the lecture. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Rabbi Silber. I'm Sam Rapoport. My wife, Sandra, and our family welcome you, and thank you for participating in this event to honor the memory of our parents, David and Rose Rapoport, and Gabriel and Rebecca Sharon, and to hear Rabbi Nathan Laufer deliver the 24th Annual Rapoport Family Memorial Lecture. My family and I are very grateful to Rabbi David Silber, the visionary dean and founder of Drisha, for providing a mechanism through Drisha that memorializes our parents and that celebrates a lifelong commitment to Jewish education. We would like to thank you, our audience, for supporting Drisha and for returning to hear this lecture year after year. For me personally, the title of Rabbi Nathan Laufer's lecture, The Seder Within the Passover Seder, evokes poignant memories. As a young child growing up in Havana, Cuba, our Passover Seders took place at my paternal grandparents' table. My grandparents were all transplanted Eastern European Jews and strictly observant. 20 of our extended family sat around the meticulously and formally set table, the sparkling white tablecloth, the ka'ara, the matzah, and the wine. Except for my recitation of the Fir Kashas, the 4 questions, that Seder was a very formal affair, strictly following the book, punctuated by consumption of root vegetables, hard-boiled eggs, matzah, and a charoset made of a chopped apples, walnut, and wine mixture. Move forward 15 years to a different Seder table, this time in New York City. Gabriel and Rebecca Sharon, Sandra's parents, my wonderful in-laws, followed their Syrian Sephardic tradition. Theirs was a participatory Seder. There was the entire company individually acting out the leaving Mitzrayim on our way to Yerushalayim, carrying a bag of matzah on our shoulders. There was an acting out of the crossing of the Yam Suf. The blessing of Ha'adamah was blessed on a green vegetable, celery, rather than potatoes. And the charoset was made from dates and nuts. Were there even apple trees in Mitzrayim? Two very different settings of the same Haggadah script. With these diverse Seder memories swirling in my mind, I can't wait to hear Rabbi Laufer's lecture, The Seder Within the Passover Seder. This year's Rapoport Family Lecturer, Rabbi Nathan Laufer, is a senior consultant for the Tikva Fund and president emeritus of the Wexner Heritage Foundation. Rabbi Laufer is author of several books, including leading the Passover journey, the Seder's meaning revealed, the Haggadah's story retold. Please welcome Rabbi Nathan Laufer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rapoport, and thank you to Rabbi Silver for inviting me to give this lecture, to Kayla Bloom for doing all the back office arrangements, and to Noah for being the moderator and acting as the person to share share screens with you. So my thesis this morning, by you it's still morning, by us it's evening in Israel, is that like all great literature, the Haggadah and the Seder is a tightly structured work of art that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Just as no one would claim that Shakespeare put together his plays haphazardly, using an actor scene here, another act scene there, so too is it mistaken to look at, interpret the Passover Haggadah, the Jewish tradition's greatest performed ritual, as consisting of a series of, random atomistic parts. My claim is that the Haggadah's organizing principle is the chronology of the key events in Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus, beginning with its first verses, literally, and concluding with its last verses. What the Haggadah does is touch upon and interpret the major pivot points of the book of Exodus to tell us our people's foundational story and to interpret its ultimate meaning. The Ramban, Nachmanides, calls Sefer Shemot, which is the basis of the Haggadah, Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. And therefore, on one foot, I would say the Haggadah takes us on a journey, the journey of the Jewish people from physical and political enslavement to Pharaoh, to physical liberation and spiritual redemption by God. So if you have these readily available, please open up your Haggadot and your Chumash to the beginning of Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus. If not, we'll use screen shares so everyone can follow along. To understand the Haggadah, we have to make sense of its structure. Now, how do we know that there is a structure to the Haggadah? Well, we know because it has a Seder, right? It has a table of contents, which we open up at the beginning, and many families, I don't know if your families do this, but we sing the table of contents. Now, I don't know of any other book in which we sing the table of contents. So you sing something if you want to remember it and be able to follow the order. So the order must be important. So the first thing I ask you to look at right in front of you is what I call the kinesthetic Seder. It's the Seder in which we will be doing things. And if you look at it, you'll see that there are a number of items listed. How many items are there? If you were going to answer me, you would say, well, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, there are 15. There are 15 items in the kinesthetic Seder. Well, why are there 15? What's special about 15? Well, what day does Passover take place on? In the Hebrew month of Nisan, it takes place on the 15th day of Nisan. Wow, 15th day of Nisan. Well, that's interesting. Anything else? Well, later on in the Haggadah, in the middle of Magid, we're going to come across something called the Dayenu. And Dayenu is, again, one of those things that we know because we sing it, right? So we Dayenu. And before we sing it, there's one verse that says, Kama malot tovot lamakom aleinu. How many steps are there to praise God for, basically? Okay. Well, guess how many items there are in the Dayenu to praise God for? Yep, that's right, 15. Just a coincidence. But, here's another coincidence. If you opened up a Sefer Torah, if you opened up a Torah scroll, and you scrolled over to the Song at the Sea, Az Yashir Moshe, which many observant Jews recite daily. In the Sefer Torah, there are 3 columns.
And in the middle column of the Song of the Sea, there are like ladder steps. And how many ladder steps do you think there are at the Song of the Sea? That's right, 15. Wow, well, another coincidence. And then, here's another thing. If you ever come to Israel and you go to the Southern Wall excavations, you'll see that there are steps that led up to the Temple Mount. And how many steps do you think there were? That's right, 15. And if you open up a book of Psalms and you go to Psalm 120 and you see how many Psalms are there that starts Shir HaMa'alot, the song or the Psalm of the steps. How many Shir HaMa'alot are there? That's right, 15. And if you go to synagogue on the holidays, in Israel it would be every day, but in the diaspora it's on the holidays. And the priests go up front and they bless the congregation, or you bless your children on a Shabbat. How many words are there in the priestly blessing? That's right, 15 words. Now, what do all these 15s mean? What these 15s mean is that there are 15 steps to encounter the divine presence, to encounter the Shekhinah. Okay, when people went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem and they went up to the Temple Mount, they came to encounter God's presence there. And they would listen to the Levites sing the Shir HaMa'alot, and they would be blessed by the priests who were doing the avodah, who were doing their work, as it were, on the Temple Mount. And when the Jewish people were standing at the sea, they witnessed the divine presence become manifest. And on the night of Passover, the 15th day of Nisan, they witnessed God's presence becoming manifest. As the Haggadah will tell us, I came down to Egypt to rescue the Jewish people. I am not a seraph, I am not an angel, and I am not a messenger. It was myself, God alone. And therefore, Maggid will tell us later on that among the things that God did, it was Norah, and Norah is Gilui Shekhinah, the manifestation of the divine presence. So what we're going to be doing in the Seder, in the 15 steps of the Seder, is we're going to go on a journey to encounter the divine presence. And it's maybe not a coincidence that in Gematria, in the numerical understanding of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the word Yah, which appears in the Song of the Sea, which is the shortest way of saying God in Hebrew, is Yud 10 Hey 5 15. Okay, so we have a Seder. That's great. Is this the only Seder we have? Or do we have other Seders as well? I argued at the beginning that this is a very tightly structured night, very tightly structured text. Well, when you come into your dining rooms in your respective homes, and you described two of your beautiful homes just a few minutes ago, before you even sit down and before you even open up your Haggadah, you see something in the middle of the table, and that's the Seder plate. Now, it's not called the Seder plate because we use it at the Seder. It's called the Seder plate because it has a Seder. It has an order to it. And there are many different ways of organizing the Seder plate, okay? There's one book that was written by Gabriel Zinner. It's a book about the laws of Pesach. And in it, he gives 18 different ways of arranging the Seder plate. So I have to tell you that what you see in front of you on the screen share is the 19th. But, that's kind of like, well, like the Shmona Esrei. It's supposed to be Shmona Esrei, 18 blessings, but actually there are 19. So here's the 19th, okay? This is the way that we, in my family, arrange the Seder plate, and it's meant to reflect the Seder of the Haggadah, okay? So just quickly, at 1 o'clock, and on that Seder plate, we have the karpas. And as we'll see in the kinesthetic Seder, when we get to it, which shortly, Karpas represents the growth of the Jewish people, the enormous growth of the Jewish people in Egypt. When the Jews came down to Egypt, they didn't start by being enslaved. They came down and they were highly successful. And the way that the Torah tells us that is in the very first 7 verses of the book of Exodus. The Torah tells us, Uvenei Yisrael, Paru vayishritzu vayirbu vayatzmu b'ma'od ma'od v'timale haaretz otam. I mean, you can't miss this. The Jewish people became numerous and multiplied and became powerful, very powerful, and they filled the land. Now, anyone who remembers Genesis will remember that when God blessed Adam and Eve in the first chapter, he said, Pru urvu milu et haaretz v'kivshuha. You should become prolific and multiply and fill the land. So the Jewish people, when they came down to Egypt, fulfilled the blessings in the Garden of Eden. Wow. So they felt great. They were karpas. Yes, we were growing and powerful, and it couldn't be better. But then, if you go to the next item, you have charoset. Oh, charoset is the mortar of the enslavement already. Now, we'll see later on when we talk about karpas and what you do, that the custom of Middle Eastern nations is that they dip the karpas, the vegetable, whatever the vegetable might be, into charoset. Us in the Ashkenazic tradition dip it into salt water. Okay, but charoset represents the response of Pharaoh to our karpas. In other words, if you read the next 7 verses, let's say, of Exodus, chapter 1, verses 8 to 14, you would see that Pharaoh gets up and he says, "Uh-oh, Bnei Israel, right? They're growing, and you know what's going to happen? They might gang up on us when our enemies attack us, and then they'll take over the land." In other words, what Pharaoh is afraid of is the part of the blessing that God gave Adam and Eve, Vikivshuha, that you should conquer the earth. And he said, uh-oh, they're going to come and conquer us. So we have to do something to sap their vitality. And therefore, he began to enslave them. He had them build cities at the beginning. It looked nice, okay, everybody has to contribute. And then as time went on, because they continued to grow, it got worse and worse and worse. Okay, so that's the second item. Then maror, that's the third item on the Seder plate. The third item on the Seder plate is something that represents our embitteredness. The more we were enslaved, the harder the work, the more we felt embittered. The next item on the Seder plate is chazeret. And the chazeret is like maror. Some people use ground horseradish for maror or romaine lettuce. And then for chazeret, they use a solid piece of horseradish. And the difference between chazeret and maror is that chazeret cannot be swallowed. It's unassimilable. And it can't be assimilated by the Jewish people. And I think in the story of the Exodus, it's what follows for the next 8 verses, where Pharaoh, trying to stem the growth of the Jewish people and not succeeding, finally says, Kol haben hayilod hayoret tashlichu v'chol habat techayun, that every baby boy that is born shall be cast into the Nile, and every girl can live, which is essentially to extinguish the Jewish people. Okay. Wow, that's pretty bad. But there's another 2 items on the Seder plate. The next one is zeroah. And zeroah is the shank bone representing the Korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, which the Jewish people ate on the night that they were liberated from Egypt. And finally, there is the beitzah, which represents, it's a roasted egg, and it represents another sacrifice that was brought in the temple in Jerusalem. It's called the Korban Chagiga, especially for the holiday, and it represents the complete the complete redemption of the Jewish people. They're coming to the Israel, they're building the Beit HaMikdash, they're building the temple, and they're coming to witness the divine presence in Jerusalem. So basically, the Seder plate tells us the story of the Exodus. It tells us the whole story. And so it's already helping us structure the evening even before we actually sit down and start to do the things that the kinesthetic Seder, the first Seder, the 15-item Seder, has us do. Okay? There's one other Seder that I want to kind of alert you to, and that's the Seder of Magid, which I call the verbal Seder. And again, if we can get to the screen share on this. Yes, Magid is the part of the Seder where, the natives get restless. Because, after the 4 questions, which is neat, and, all the kids are involved and so on, and we sing Avadim Hayinu maybe, and then it suddenly starts to go all over the place. Suddenly there are a bunch of rabbis in Bnei Brak, and then there's one rabbi and he's talking to another rabbi, and it's like, how did we get to Bnei Brak? And that's like 1,500 years after the Exodus, and I thought we were talking about being slaves and free, and what's happening? And then we go on, and then somewhere later in the Seder we start talking about Lavan and Jacob, and it's like, wow, how do we get to Lavan? Lavan is also a few hundred years before the Exodus. So it's like we get lost. But the truth is that there is a structure to Magid. And if you know the structure, you can find your way in the Haggadah and understand what's going on. So very briefly, I'm going to tell you that the structure of Magid follows the structure of the verse on which the entire Haggadah is based. The Haggadah is based on the verse, V'higadata, you should tell, Livincha, to your children, by Yom Hahu, on that day, Le'imor ba'avur zeh, saying, this is why Asa Hashem li, God did for me, Vitzeiti mi Mitzrayim, when I left Egypt. Okay, so I will briefly go through that later on, but I just want to point out that there are 3 Seders. There is the kinesthetic Seder, 15 items, there is the Seder plate, and there is the verbal Seder. So there's a verbal Seder, a visual Seder, and a kinesthetic Seder. And the reason you have so many different Seders is because the rabbis were great educators. And they said there are some people who learn by doing. We need the kinesthetic Seder for them. There are some people who learn by seeing. We need the Seder plate for them. And there's some people who learn best by hearing and talking. And so for them, we need the verbal, the audio, if you wish, Seder. Okay, so we have 3 Seders. All right, now, so that's great, Rabbi, you would say. So what's with the rabbis? Are they like obsessed with Seder, with order? What's the issue? Well, the issue is this, as they would say in Hebrew, bikitzur. The issue is that the world that we live in often seems chaotic and evil and very difficult. And our sense is the world is out of control. Our sense is there's no order in the universe. And so the Seder is the way that the book of Exodus and the Haggadah on which it is based is trying to signal a very important message to the Jewish people. And that is that there is an order in the universe, although often, like in Magid, we can't find it. We seem lost. We don't know what's going on. It feels terrible. So the Haggadah comes and says, take it easy, relax, sit down, and I will tell you a story. And this is a story that tells you that ultimately in history, there is order. You may not experience it. Your whole generation may not experience it. Your children's generation and grandchildren's generation may not experience it. But at some point in the future, they will experience the order and the redemption. That is the story that the Haggadah is trying to tell us. Okay. All right, with that in mind, I guess we can start going to the kinesthetic Seder. So let's go to Kaddish, okay? So Kaddish is Kiddush. Well, everybody knows Kiddush. We say Kiddush on Shabbos, and we say Kiddush on every holiday, and so it's like, okay, so what's special about this? Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, as we do on other holidays, in fact, we emphasize the fact that there is an agenda in Kiddush. What is the agenda? The agenda is that we are concerned with Zman. Excuse me? Yeah, everybody sees this? Everybody can see the Kiddush? Okay, yeah, all right. So we're concerned with time. And if you look at the Kiddush that I photocopied for you here, you'll see that Zman keeps showing up. It shows up, in fact, 4 times within the Kiddush. And the way I like to think about this is that Kiddush is a time machine. It is a time machine that is taking us back to what? Well, it tells us to what? Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim, to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Okay, so what Kiddush is meant to do is to take our mind to remind us of the Exodus from Egypt. Now, what makes this special is that it's not like the rest of the holidays or like Shabbat, where you drink 1 cup of wine and that's it. No, there are 4 cups of wine. And for every cup of wine, you don't say Kiddush, but you do say a bracha, Bori Priagafen. Why do you have 4 cups of wine? What do they do? Well, within the context of the Seder, within the context of the Haggadah, they too are structuring devices. They take us to 4 different times in the course of the history of the book of Exodus, and they have us pay attention. They reset the stage for where we are in the story. Now, our rabbi said that these 4 cups of wine correspond to 4 verbs of redemption that God promises Moshe and the Jewish people at the beginning of Parshat Va'era. Okay? Seiti, Vitzalti, okay? And if you have time to read either of my books that I've written on the holidays, especially the one on the Passover Seder, you would see how each of those verbs correspond to the 4 moments in time that the cups are meant to send us to. So let me try to make this a little clearer. The first cup is taking us to Egypt, right? If we're going to leave Egypt, we have to first arrive there, okay? And we'll see that in the first 7 verses of Exodus. This second cup will take us to the night of the Last Supper. Not that Last Supper, our Last Supper, which preceded it by about, 1,200, 1,500 years. The third cup will take us to the shore of the sea, okay, where we're going to have 2 things that take place. We'll get to that when we get to it. And finally, the 4th cup will take us to Mount Sinai, all right? So each cup is a structural device to help reset the stage, to take us to a different time and space in the Exodus story. Okay, all right. So we've got Kaddish and we've explained the 4 cups, and let's move on. All righty, let's see, what's the next item on the thing? We're going to go to Kaddish and Urchatz. Okay, Urchatz. So Urchatz, we wash our hands, but we don't say a blessing. So what is this about? What is this about? We're washing our hands, but we're not saying a blessing. Now, that's very strange, because on Shabbat and Yom Tov, otherwise, we do wash our hands, but we say a blessing. And later on, in fact, in the Seder, we will wash our hands again and say a blessing. So Urchatz, because it does not have a blessing, means that it is not about mindfulness. You know that the purpose of blessings is to get us to be mindful of something, right? In case of of washing our hands. Usually we're washing it in preparation for bread. We should be mindful of the fact that we're going to partake of the staff of life that God created. Okay, wonderful. But because we don't have a blessing, it means that the act of urchatz is itself meant to be signaling something redemptive. In other words, it's not the blessing that's going to serve the function of mindfulness. It's the act of preparing our bodies to view the divine presence. Okay, as I said before, later on the Maggid will tell us that we're going to encounter the divine presence. And when you encounter the divine presence in the Torah, you always have to wash your hands. How do we know that? Well, we know it, for instance, from something we read just yesterday in the Torah portion, that before Moshe, Aaron, or his children could go into the Ohel Moed where the divine presence stayed, they had to wash their hands in the kior and the kano, right? And the pitcher and basin. And in fact, in my family, what we have is we have one person, just one person, the person who's leading the Seder, have a pitcher and basin brought to them, and they wash, someone else washes the hands of that person, just like the kior and kano. There's a pitcher and there's a basin, because we are reenacting the preparation to encounter the divine presence. We also see that before Matan Torah at Mount Sinai, where the rabbis interpret the verses of the Jewish people preparing themselves as they're having going to a mikvah of washing themselves. Because before you go encounter God, you want to be as best and as good a shape as you can. And it's signaling us also, it's telling us through these actions that what God did in the book of Exodus, the primary thing that God did is he rescued us physically. He rescued the body politic of the Jewish people. He redeemed us from enslavement in Egypt. Okay. Kadesh Orchatz, they are the introduction. One takes our mind back to Egypt, and the second takes our bodies back to Egypt, ready to encounter the divine presence. And now we get to Karpas. Remember Karpas? We had it on the Seder plate too. All right. So Karpas represents the growth of the Jewish people. How do I know that? Right? I'm making that claim, like we say, I never heard of that before. I always was taught in Hebrew school and in yeshiva and in day school that Karpas is about spring. You know, we have a vegetable because it's spring. Well, I was taught that too, but you know what? I think we know it's spring. All you have to do is take a deep breath and you know it's spring. So it's like the rabbis are not here to teach us something that's obvious. But in Maggid, we're taught something very important. It says on the word varov that the Jewish people increased. Remember, I read the verse before, chapter 1, verse 7. The people increased, varov. It says, Rivava kitzemech hasaden satich. I made you so numerous, like the plants in the field. Like the plants in the field. So I guess what you do is you take a plant in the field, right? And what do? You dip it in salt water, or again, Edot HaMizrach, the Eastern countries have the custom of dipping it in charoset. Why? Because it was the very growth of the Jewish people that triggered Pharaoh to try to enslave us. And so when the Torah describes the enslavement, it tells us that they enslaved the Jewish people befarach, with very hard labor, bechomer uvenim uvechol avodah basadeh, with all kinds of construction materials, heavy bricks, and all types of work in the field. Now, anybody who knows the weather in Egypt knows it's very hot there. So if you close your eyes for a second, then imagine the Jewish people working in Egypt, slave laboring in Egypt under the hot Egyptian sun. What do their bodies look like? They look like they're drenched in sweat. And so what we do is we take the symbol of the growth of the Jewish people and we, as it were, drench it in sweat, whether it's charoset, the water, or it's salt water, the sweat of the Jewish people. Again, in Hebrew school, everybody said, oh, it's the tears, it's spring and tears, and it's a mishmash. No, it's not a mishmash. It actually makes a lot of sense. And it's not tears, because frankly, the Torah never says that the Jewish people cried. It says that they cried out to God, or they cried out stam, but it never says that they cried. Vayivku, they never cried, but they definitely sweated. Okay, so that's karpas, and now we get to yachatz. And yachatz, we take a matzah. Which matzah do we take? How many matzahs are there on the table? Again, we're trying to signal things, not only through the Seder plate, but through the matzahs. There are 3 matzahs on the table, and they stand for something. Some people have a matzah cover that actually have little tabs, so you know what they stand for. Kohen, the priests, Levi, the Levites, and Yisrael, the Israelites. Who are Kohen, Levi, Israel? The collective Jewish people at the time of the Exodus. They were the collective Jewish people in Egypt. Which matzah do we take? We take the middle one. And which one is the middle one? Oh, that's the Levi matzah. Wow. And what do? Well, we break it in half. Well, on one level, you could say, well, the breaking of the matzah in half is like breaking the spirits, breaking the backs of the Jewish people when Pharaoh issued his decree to drown all the Jewish boys in the Nile. On the other hand, it is the Levi matzah. And then what do we do with that? Okay, we broke it in half. Now we're holding 2 pieces of matzah in our hands. Well, we take the bigger one and we wrap it up. And what do we do with the wrapped up matzah? Well, we hide it. And who's watching us hide it? Oh, the children. Well, why are they watching us hide the matzah? Well, because they're going to try to steal it back. And they're going to negotiate some kind of reward for that. Wow. And the little piece of matzah, the smaller piece of matzah, oh, we put that back inside with the 2 whole matzahs. Wow. That's very interesting because, right after Pharaoh issues his decree, the Torah goes to chapter 2. And chapter 2 begins that a man of Levi took a daughter of Levi as a wife. And they had this baby boy. And this is very bad when Pharaoh wants to kill all the baby boys. So she hides him. And the words that's used is vatispinehu. She hides him. And then v'lo yachla od hatzpino. She couldn't hide him anymore. Wow. Whenever the Torah uses the same word twice in close proximity, it's called doubling. It's trying to tell you, pay attention. Okay, I'm paying attention. So we have the hiding, and then the mother says, okay, I can't hide him anymore. So she wraps him up and puts him in a basket and sets him on the Nile. And who is looking out after him to see what will happen to him? Oh, the daughter, the 5-year-old daughter, Miriam, is going to watch. And then she's going to, when she sees that the daughter of Pharaoh is going to pull him out of the Nile, she's going to come running to her and saying, well, maybe you'd like a wet nurse so that, the baby will stop crying. And Pharaoh's daughter agrees to pay. Wow. She agrees to pay for Moshe's mother to actually take care of him and to feed him. Wow. I wonder if that's what we're doing when we take the middle matzah, the Levi matzah, break it and take the bigger part, because who is the hero of the story of the Exodus? Well, the real hero is God, but there is a very, 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 very important player. I don't even think it's a supporting actor. I think he's like a major actor, and that's Moshe. And then the supporting actors are probably, Aaron and Miriam. They're more supporting actors. So they go back with the rest of the Jewish people. They grow up with the Jewish people, but Moshe was going to grow up separately. And Moshe is going to be hidden. Now, when are we going to take out this big matzah, this bigger part of the matzah? We take it out almost at the end of the Seder, well, at the end of the meal in any event, and we have what's called the afikomen. But in the kinesthetic Seder, if you look at the list, there's nothing that says afikomen. What is the word about taking out the afikomen and eating it? It's called tzafun. Tzafun. Everybody see that? 4 from the bottom. Tzafun. Oh, right, because that was the word that the Torah used to say that Moshe's mother couldn't hide him anymore. So she had to hide. So, oh, I get it. Tzafun means the hidden one. And Moshe is going to come out when? When the last night of Egypt, the Last Supper. Because then he's going to do what God commissioned him to do, which is what? To lead the Jewish people out of Egypt. That's when Tzafun becomes manifest. Okay, so now we understand what Yachatz is, all right? Okay, and now we get to Magid. Now, before we get to actually Magid, you know that we have the 4 questions. The reason we have the 4 questions is because before we start telling a story, we want to engage everybody and, have them like say, well, what is this story going to tell us about? And what is it trying to answer? Because in order to have a statement or a paragraph or a book, there has to be something that it's trying to tell us. So what is the logic of the 4 questions? Well, there is a logic. There is an order. Of course, there has to be an order. And the order is, well, there's really one question. The question is, who are we? Not how different this night is from every other night, but who are we, the Jewish people? Are we poor slaves? Why poor? Because you're eating matzah. And you know what? We just said, this is the bread of poverty that our ancestors ate in Egypt. So we're eating matzah. So we're acting like we're poor. And we're eating maror, the next question, which shows that we're embittered, we're oppressed. In other words, we're slaves. And then we do the opposite. We go and have hors d'oeuvres. We're going to dip twice. Well, poor people don't have hors d'oeuvres. They're happy to just eat whatever they can get their hands on. And then what else? We're going to be lying down. We're going to be lying down instead of standing ramrod straight the way a slave is. Well, if we're lying down, then there must be nobility. So who are we? Are we poor slaves? Or are we well-off nobility? This is so confusing, you say. So the Haggadah answers, Avadim hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim, v'yotzienu Hashem misham b'yad chazaka u'b'zroa netuya. Yeah, you know what? We were slaves. That's why we're going to have matzah and maror. But God took us out, and He redeemed us, and that's why we're going to lie down and have hors d'oeuvres. So it actually makes sense if you understand that we're going to go through a journey. We're starting as slaves, but we're going to go somewhere else. Okay, and that's why later on, when Rabbi Gamliel says, you have to talk about the matzah, he doesn't talk about us being, eating the bread of poverty in Egypt. He talks about, that when we left Egypt, this was the bread of redemption because we didn't have time even to prepare food, and we just went out without provisions, without being able to bake it beforehand. So we baked it on our backs, okay? Yes, so matzah has 2 meanings. It depends, though, where in the story you're up to. If you're at the beginning of the story, which is where we still are, then it's halach ma'anya da chalwa b'tana bara de Mitzrayim. It's just bread of poverty. But if you're later on in the story, it becomes, story of redemption. Okay, so we're up to Magid, and as I said to you before, if you can go back to the verbal Seder, that sheet, it's divided into 6 parts. So the first part of Magid, beginning with Avadim Hayinu, is telling us what we tell. Okay, it says V'higadata. So we say, okay, well, what do we tell? Well, the simplest answer is the answer that's given by Shmuel in the Talmud. And Shmuel says what we tell is we were slaves, God took us out, yay. Okay. But then we have other questions. It's like, well, who's supposed to tell? Is everybody supposed to tell the story? I mean, like rabbis, they know all this stuff already. So they don't have to tell, do they? Oh, yes, they need to tell too. Oh, okay. Well, how much should they tell? Maybe just do like, this Avodah Me'ila Param Mitzrayim, God took us out, yay, let's eat. Oh, not really. The more you tell, the better it is. Because it's not really about knowledge. It's not about knowing, it's about doing. It's about being the Jew who left Egypt. It's about going in that time machine and going down and becoming an Egyptian Jew, 1250 BCE. And for that, we have to tell the story and believe what we're telling. Okay. Levincha, you have the next section of the Maggid section, which is about the four sons, right? There is, the smart son and the wicked son and the Tamla. And this is all following what the Mishnah tells us, that we have to vary what we say depending upon who our audience is. I just want to point out one quick thing and move on from here, because I don't have time, although I'd love to. The binary here is between the Chacham and the Rasha, between the wise and the wicked. And it's odd, it's an odd binary, except when you understand that the difference between them is that the Chacham is loyal to his people and to his tradition, and the Rasha is not. And that's why they're binary. So you can be very smart, you can be a Rasha who's very, very smart, very intelligent, but if you don't feel a sense of loyalty to your family, which is what the Jewish people are, you're an extended family, then the Haggadah says you're a Rasha. But you're not beyond hope because you still are sitting at the Seder. So, you try to re-engage him. Okay? Tam, and then Yenishteni Yudei L'Shol. Okay, so that's Levincha. That's Vihigadata, right? You should tell. Levincha. All right? And then the next part, going back, if you go back to the verbal Seder, let's go back to the screen share of the verbal Seder. We have a thing, not the verbal, not the kinesthetic, the verbal Seder. That's, let's see, number 3. Okay, there we go. So by Yom Hahu, okay, on that day. And that's the part, unfortunately, I don't have a screen share for it, that there's one paragraph that says, Yachol me Rosh Chodesh. Maybe we thought we should tell the story beginning on Rosh Chodesh, instead of trying to cram it into one night or to one Rapoport Memorial Lecture, let's take a month to do this. So, or at least half a month beginning on Rosh Chodesh. So we say, no, it has to be when the matzah and maror are standing in front of you, because that's what the pasuk says. You're pointing at something. So the matzah and maror must be in front of you. Okay. Leimor ba'avur zeh. This is the biggest part of Maggid, and basically, I don't have the time to go through it in any great detail. But what I can say is, what we're doing, aside from just telling, is we're going deep. Okay, we're doing a deep dive, and we're asking, why were the Jews enslaved and why were they redeemed? And that part of Maggid has 3 protagonists, I would say. One is Rav, who says, listen, to be enslaved, yep, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was that we were idolaters. Okay, that we had no relationship to God. We were lost. We were lost in the universe. Okay, but then God brought us close to Him, and God gave us, give us the Torah and give us Pesach and all this stuff. Okay, so that's why we were enslaved. We were redeemed because God made a promise to Abraham, and He said that one day this would happen, and He would redeem us. And God keeps His promises. That's Rav. There's something called the Stam Mishnah. It's not identified that way, but it's the part that begins about Lavan HaArami. And he has a very interesting perspective. And he says, well, we were enslaved because, that was what God said was going to happen. But, essentially it's because the Egyptians were evil. And we were redeemed because God couldn't take it anymore. He saw us suffering and he said, I got to redeem them. I can't watch their suffering anymore. And then there's Rabbi Gamliel. And Rabbi Gamliel comes along, and one way of interpreting Rabbi Gamliel is that he's saying Pesach Matzah Maror. You have to say these things because they symbolize what made the Jewish people great. Pesach, they had the courage to slaughter the lamb of the Egyptians in their face, so to speak. Matzah, because they went out to the desert without any provisions. And finally Maror, because they had the resilience and the fortitude to be able to survive all those years of slavery. Okay, so that's Lemor Ba'avur Asa Hashem Li. If we go back to that number 3, that important verbal Seder thing, Asa Hashem Li is let's see, you have it here actually. Yeah, number 9, screen share number 9. Asa Hashem Li, God did for me. That every person has to imagine themselves as if they were in Egypt and God rescued them from Egypt. So it's what God did for me, not what they did for our ancestors. No, not only our ancestors, for me, because I have gone back to Egypt. And B'tzeiti Mitzrayim is the first 2 verses of Hallel, which ends B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. B'tzeiti Yisrael, one Yud from Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. Okay, so that is the order of Magid. All right, very important. The next let's see, I think there's 7 things. Rachza Motzi Matmara Korech Shulchan Orech Tzafun Barech. Those are all the Last Supper of Egypt. Okay, that's what it is. We wash our hands. It's time to eat matzah because we talked about what matzah means. It was a bread of coffee, became the bread of redemption. We eat more with bitterness because it tells us al matzot umrorim yochlu, that the Paschal sacrifice was within al matzot umrorim, so it's like sandwich. Shulchan Orech is, I believe it is the substitute, the real substitute for the Karban Pesach. The Gemara tells us we have to eat 2 cooked foods, one for according to Rav Yosef, one for the Karban Pesach, one for the Karban Chagiga, the holiday sacrifice. So you have some people eat an egg for the second sacrifice, right? Just like we had in the Seder. Then we have Tzafon, that's the Afikomen, that's Moshe emerging, so to speak, and we imbibe the spirit of Moshe's leadership. And then Barech, we say Birkat Hamazon. It happens to be the Pharaoh said when he let the Jews go, he said Barech Gamoti, bless me too. Of course, implying that the Jews were praising God. Okay, blessing God. All right, we have Hallel and Yitzhak, and then we're finished. So Hallel, but before we get to Hallel, we have the 3rd cup, and the 3rd cup takes us to the sea. And before we start singing, we have Shvach HaMatcha. We have this very strange prayer, which comes out of nowhere. And it's like we just praise God in Barech and Birkat Hamazon. We're going to sing to God Hallel. And it's like, what are we doing in the middle of this with this very vindictive prayer? And we're opening up the door, and Elijah's coming in, and we've poured the cup of Elijah, which is the 5th cup. And it's like, what is going on? What's going on is the Jewish people are at the sea. They look back and, oh my God, here come the Egyptians. And they turn to Moshe and say, why did you take us out of here? We're going to all die. And Moshe says, calm down, relax. Just, God is going to save you. And then there's a space in the Torah. And then it says, God says to Moshe, why are you praying to me? Now, nowhere in the Torah does it say that Moshe was praying to God. So the rabbis said, what could have been that prayer that Moshe was praying to God? I know, I'll use these verses. And these verses talk about pouring out. Remember, we're going to split the sea and we're going to pour. Twice the word shafoch is found. Pour the nations that didn't know you. Who didn't know you? Pharaoh. Pharaoh said when Moshe came to him the very first time, he said, I don't know. I don't know any God named Hashem. Look, I'll never send the Jews out. Oh, I see. You're never going to send the Jews out. Well, this nation has been incredibly radically evil. And when people are radically evil, sometimes you have to do difficult things. In this case, you have to drown the Egyptian army. Well, you have Shvo Chamatcha, but then you do all sorts of hallels. There are 3 different hallels. Again, I commend to you the books that I've written on leading the Passover journey or Rendezvous with God, which talks about all the holidays for you to understand why these different hallels were used and not the song at the sea. And finally, there's Nirtza. And Nirtza takes us to Mount Sinai. Nirtza means acceptance. God was supposed to accept us, and we were supposed to accept God at Mount Sinai. God offered us a covenant. We said yes, and it looked like we'd live happily ever after, until the golden calf, 40 days later. And then it looked like we were going to get divorced. And then, thank God, we had a matchmaker named Moshe. And Moshe comes in, and he saves the day, and he brings God and the Jewish people back together. And the very, very end of the book of Exodus, which is, I think, number 12. Yes, here we go. There's it. The very end of the book of Exodus, God decides to come live with the Jewish people. He asks the Jewish people to build a home for him, and God's presence, the divine presence, comes and dwells in the home. And the Torah tells us that it was so full of the divine presence that Moshe couldn't enter. So Moshe, who was hidden in the Haggadah, who was hidden, wrapped up in the matzah, and who you will barely find once in the Ashkenazic Haggadah, never in the Sephardic Haggadah, Moshe remains outside. Because the story of the Haggadah and the story of the Seder is the Jewish people's unmitigated love relationship between themselves and with God. And that is what the whole Seder and the whole Haggadah is trying to get us to re-experience, to feel that, because that's what gives us hope in the middle of our sometimes chaotic and difficult universe, and makes us feel that there is cause for joy and for redemption and for a hopeful future.
Rabbi, it's Sandra. I just want to thank you so much. Can I ask a question?
Oh, you may ask any question.
This was mind-bogglingly wonderful. Thank you. So when we're now in this Haggadah, we're in this order of things, leading us from pre-Avdut to Avdut to Geula.
Yeah.
And you're talking about we go from a confusing world to a world of inherent order again and again and again. Could it also be that we're coming out of Purim? And Purim was crazy not order. God wasn't anywhere. It's almost, or the question is, was God anywhere? And so it's almost, I'm just going to use my word, the anti-Purim, coming from the script of Purim, which shows chaos and anti-order, to the tekes, the ceremony that shows God is here, God is here, God is here at every step, and is the essence of order. Could you speak to that? Perhaps that's also, it's a dialectic from moving from Purim to Pesach.
Well, I think you said it very beautifully. Look, I think Pesach is actually the beginning of the year. Rosh Hashanah is not the beginning of the year. We know that, right? Pesach is the beginning of the year. HaChodesh Hazeh, we just read it yesterday. Pashat HaChodesh. HaChodesh Hazeh Yelechem Rosh Chodashim. This month, Pesach, is how we start counting Jewish time. Okay, so we start with this paradigm of order, and then as the year goes on, God, in some ways, becomes more distant. Hanukkah already, which is before, in the winter, it's already, God is much more hidden. This is not, there are not miracles taking place in the public sphere. Hey, yeah, maybe some priests saw, the oil light for 8 days. Okay, nice. That's nice. That's good. But it's not like splitting the sea, right? And then we get to Purim, and like you said, God isn't even mentioned, right? It seems to be chaotic, no order at all. I mean, again, I don't read it that way, but I know many people do. So I think that there is that dialectic, and there is the need to go from that sense of living in diaspora, and it's like everything is going crazy, which is, by the way, the cycle of Jewish history, right? It's not just the cycle of the Jewish holidays, it's the cycle of Jewish history, right? We come to a place, everything looks good, just like the Jews in Egypt. Everything is great. The Jews are doing terrific. We're so strong. We're so powerful. We are mitsuyanim sham. That's what it says in the Haggadah in Magid. Sham legoy. We became a nation, and it's like we were outstanding. That's the problem. When we become outstanding, we become a target.
Targets.
Yeah, and it's and there's a terrible paradox here. I learned from Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who was my teacher. This is my teacher. That Jewish weakness invites aggression, and therefore Jews cannot be weak. Not after the Holocaust. You can't afford to be weak. But here's the paradox. The paradox is when you're strong, it's also not good. In other words, you get strong to the point where people say you're a threat. Whether you're a Pharaoh or a Haman, or you're in the Inquisition, or you're a Hitler, or you're whatever, to the people today who want to destroy us, okay, a Khomeini, okay? So it's like, what is? Well, this is what it is. It's a cycle of history. And if God wasn't with us, if God wasn't really there somehow in this order, we would have disappeared like every other nation in history. Okay, because there's no other nation in history who's gone through anything like what we've gone through and survived. So this is what the Haggadah is telling us. The Haggadah is telling us a story. It didn't start off as enslavement. It didn't start off as infanticide. It started off terrific. But things deteriorated. We didn't do anything bad. Okay, we didn't do anything that deserves this. But people are envious, they are afraid, they feel threatened, they need to rally their population against the other, against the goy, this goy called the Jewish people, and that's what happens. So, I mean, I hate to be, so negative, but I think that's what the Haggadah is telling us. This is a cycle in Jewish history, but, God does come and save us. All right, that's what we sing. Not one person, that wasn't only Pharaoh. They tried to destroy us. But ultimately, not always so fast. Sometimes after unbelievable suffering. But ultimately, God will come and will rescue us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Fantastic and enlightening lecture. And now we know all about the Seder for 2 weeks from now.
There's no time now at our Seder. Well, who's going to give us the time to say all this?
So just say one thing, if you have your, children, grandchildren.
Yeah, great.
So tell them about Moshe and the broken matzah. They all love that.
I love it. And that he's hidden. That's fabulous.
And yes, he's hidden. And he remains hidden at Hayom Hazeh, right? So how the Torah ends. The Torah says that we don't know his burial place until today.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay. Do we perhaps have time for 1 or 2 questions?
Sure.
Anyone wants to raise your hand, or if you're already in the room and prefer to just type something, you can do that. I'd like to bring up one question from the chat. Sivan asks, does it always take generations to see the inherent order behind apparent chaos?
I think it's the luck of the draw. It depends what generation you're born into. I was very fortunate. I was born into a generation in which there was the state of Israel,
When I was 10 years old, the Jewish people won the 6-day war, which I'm sure 1,000 years from now, people are going to say, "Oh, it doesn't mean 6 days. It took 6 years or 6 months, and all right, it's not possible." I mean, I lived through redemption. I saw the Jewish people being saved in the Yom Kippur War. I mean, we saved ourselves, but there were a few heroes that saved the Jewish people, that saved the nation of Israel. And I saw the American Jewish community save Soviet Jewry. I mean, I've been the luckiest guy in the world, and I had the privilege and the pleasure of living in Israel now for almost 20 years. What a zchut. Okay, it's not always easy. We're living through a difficult time right now, but I have to believe that God is present. This is how I understand what God's name is. Yud He Vav He is Haya Hover V'Yiyeh. God is ever present. The God of the Jewish people is always present. Will God's presence mean that I will always experience redemption? No, not necessarily. Although I have a belief in that ultimately as well. But nevertheless, I believe God is here.
Wonderful. So to just highlight Sivan, who asked that question, his response to your response is wonderful. We are indeed born in the right generation. So I'd like to bless everyone here to feel that, at least for a small moment in life, if not continually. And we have another interesting question from Beverly, which is definitely related to a lot of the things that we discussed during the Seder. Hasn't anti-Semitism saved the Jews?
No, that's John Paul Sartre's understanding of the Jewish survival. It's not the Haggadah's understanding of Jewish survival. We see it as a tragedy. Okay, it's not something that we want. It's saying, you need to be real. You can't be a pessimist. You can't be an optimist. You have to be a realist. And we have gone through enough history that we should know this by now. I always recommend that people read a book by Amos Elon called "The Pity of It All," which is a story of German Jewry, and it was a story of tremendous success and tremendous power until it was a story of the worst Holocaust in Jewish history. So, it's like, this seems to be the recurring theme. So let's be strong and let's be together, and let's love each other. And if we do that, then we'll at least experience whatever we're experiencing together, and we won't feel alone.
Amen. Amen. Shkaya. Thank you.
Okay. Beverly, you're now in the room, so I don't know if you wanted to expand on your question.
Okay. Hi, Natan. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Hi, Beverly.
I guess I'm much more pessimistic than you. I really think that without anti-Semitism, we would assimilate. We would disappear like the Hellenists or the Greeks and the Romans. And it brings us back to where we have to start from scratch and look at our roots because we have nowhere else to turn. I don't understand why we had to go down to Mitzrayim to become a great nation and to be very populated. We assimilated there. We retained our own clothing. We spoke our own language, but we definitely assimilated and took on names and the culture. And somehow we had to be brought back, and we were idolaters. And even if you go to Egypt today and you see Elephantine, or you go to Alexandria, you see that we've adopted some of the local gods at the same time as living in Egypt. So I'm sure God's hand is in there, but the only way we would have continued to exist is if we were reminded that we're not accepted and we don't belong to anybody else but ourselves.
I totally hear you, Beverly. Thank you for sharing that.
thank you, Rabbi Laufer, for a wonderful presentation, and to the Rapoport family, as always, for sponsoring this wonderful lecture year after year after year in memory of your parents, who I'm sure are sheving nachat over these wonderful, wonderful Torah lectures that we're all being privy to. And thank you to everyone in our learning community, as always, for participating, for engaging, bringing your questions, your thoughts, your ideas, and keeping the discussion of Jewish life fresh and moving forward. So as we prepare to depart, I would like to remind folks that the Midrash class with Rabbi Dr. Samuel Labens that typically starts at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sundays will be starting today at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So if you'd like to pop in, you are welcome to join. And if you're concerned, don't worry, you didn't miss it. He graciously moved his time back a little bit for us. And we look forward to learning with you again very, very soon in other programs at Drisha. And we hope that everyone has a wonderful, orderly Passover. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well.
Chag Pesach Sameach.
Chag Sameach.